I offer you the warmest welcome to this new session of the ML2 Open Lecture Series, or Cátedra Abierta ML2, and we will call it when the sessions take place in Spanish. The ML2 Open Lecture Series is initially a master's program that intends to provide a language academic activity in editing with a window to discover who we are and what we do. Each of our lectures has always been linked to a different course in our curriculum, both in the English and Spanish entities. Each lecture features either distinguished guest speakers from Colombia and abroad, or interventions by qualified faculty. You will have the chance to participate in the lecture with our graduate students, and in a way, attend a class session with them. This is actually by design. All open lecture series sessions will take place either on Fridays at 4 p.m. or, so this year, on Saturdays at 8 a.m. aligning the class schedule. Class presenters in the ML2 Open Lecture Series have featured respected scholars from Colombia and abroad. Topics we have covered in the sessions include literacy studies of mortality, technology in the classroom, self-determination theory, digital literacy, narrative research, and identity in digital English and Spanish. For this year, we will feature 5 quality presenters from Colombia, the US, and Spain. We expect that the ML2 Open Lecture Series continues to provide a space for teachers, professional development, and civic. We also hope we will provide incentives for those in attendance to eventually join the ML2 community as graduate students or even faculty. This is also a way for us to be back to a community that has been so well in public policies. The ML2 Open Lecture Series is another endeavor that a person in a program can carry on alone. While this event is initially proposed for the MA in learning and teaching process and cycle languages, during this idea for cross-materiality has been a collective effort. I would especially like to thank the Literacy Technologies Project, the Department of Education, and the Advanced Education System for the support. Beginning of this year, we are going to start live streaming the sessions via the LSLP YouTube channel, and we will feature all sessions a little later on our video channel. It is now my honor to introduce a distinguished future speaker for today's ML2 Open Lecture Series, Dr. Alexis López. Dr. Alexis López received his Ph.D. in education from the University of Illinois International Bank. Currently, he is a research scientist in the Center for English Language Learning and Assessment at Educational Testing Service. His research focuses on the assessment of English language proficiency and the assessment of content knowledge for K-12 English learners. He previously worked as a social professor at the University of Los Angeles in Colombia and as a development specialist in second language testing for Korean. He has participated in the facets of the test development process, including developing test specifications, identifying, field testing, standard testing, and conducting alignment studies. On a personal level, I am truly delighted to introduce Alexis. I had the privilege to first meet him when we both were graduate students at the University of Illinois. He was part of a small group of Colombian welfare students who preceded me, and before I actually got to meet him, I learned from our fellow students about his qualities as a student and scholar. In fact, it is safe to say that learning about the high expectations and reputation for Colombian students in college education that Alexis and the others have built became a huge motivation, so I wouldn't disappoint in my career in the Champagne. To discuss perspectives of high-stakes standardized language assessments, to first explain the role of standardized assessments in today's societal and educational context, from social and political dimensions, to the look at the new issues surrounding language assessments, specifically how to minimize the potential negative impact. Now, without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's give Dr. López on the floor.
Thank you. Can you hear me, everybody? All right. So it's a pleasure for me to be part of this open lecture series and part of the course evaluation in second language context, because it gives me an opportunity to talk about a topic that I really enjoy and really like a lot, which is language testing. And I know that you're focusing on language testing in the classroom setting in your course, but today I would like to talk about another aspect of language testing, and that is high-stakes standardized language assessments. And I included the word high-stakes in the title because I want to focus a lot on the consequences, the impact that standardized language assessments have on different parts of the educational system, including students, teachers, educational system programs, and so forth. So we're going to be talking about that. Like Raul said, I've been working on language testing since 2000, so 15 years. And the reason why I started having a very special interest in language testing was because I had a personal bad experience with the test. And that drew me to read about what language testing was, what the purpose of assessment was, and how assessment worked in general. So that's how I began my interest in language testing. And although it's only 2 hours that we're going to be talking today, at least what I want to accomplish today is to spark an interest in you guys in continue reading and finding out about language assessment, which is a very important part of the language learning process. So let's begin. I'm going to show you an overview. So if you go to the next slide.
Got it.
I'm going to show you an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm going to focus on 4 topics. The first one is the role of high-stakes standardized assessments, not only in society, but also in the educational system. And we're going to talk about how traditionally this type of assessments have been used for different purposes. Then after that, I'm going to focus on the assessment development process, give you a little, highlight some of the most important features when developing assessments. We're talking about assessment like TOEFL or IELTS, but it could be also small, like Michigan test or a test that the new universities use for different purposes. And then the third topic will be about some technical aspects about language assessment. So we'll be talking about a little bit about validity, reliability, what those things mean. And also topics like alignment and consequences. And finally, I'm going to highlight some current directions. So some of the most important changes in language testing. So we're going to be talking about using technology and using authentic assessments and integrated tasks. So this is an overview of what we're going to be talking about. Before we get started, if we move on to the next slide, I have 3 questions for you guys, and I want you to discuss this with your neighbors or in small groups about 2 or 3 minutes. I want you to answer the following questions. The first one is, think about all the different types of high-stakes standardized assessments that you've taken so far. Think about how those assessments were used, so what kind of decisions were made based on the results of those tests. And finally, what kind of perception do you have about these assessments? So why don't we engage in a very short conversation about these 3 questions, and then we come back and we'll share some of your comments, okay?
So please get set in small groups and start the question. Yes.
Okay, so when we come back, and let's share some of those things you discussed in group. So I want to hear what some of those assessments are that people in Columbia are taking right now. So why don't we start by volunteering some names?
So when you share the answers, be shy. Anyone else? How about some of the grad students? Sorry, Alexis, these guys are too shy.
Okay.
Hold on. Yeah, first question.
The top in the order that is that, and that's it. Also the IOS, and also here in the University of Language, the center each related to the first certificate.
Not really. Why don't we do this? Why don't you raise your hand if you're taking the TOEFL test, for example? Anybody taking the TOEFL test? Let's see, like 2 hands. Okay, 3 hands. What about IELTS? Anybody taking IELTS? Anybody taking the, what do we call it, the Saber 11? an English test. So at least everybody that's taking some sort. And I'm trying to remember from I don't know if this has changed, but one of the most common tests in Colombia was the Michigan test. Is that still a popular test in Colombia, the Michigan?
No, not anymore.
No? Okay. All right. So everybody in the audience has been a test user. In this case, a test taker. Good. What about some of the uses? You simplify. Can you simplify some? Okay, can you share some of the uses? If you can do that with a simple word, for example, for classification or placement. Can you give me some of the uses for those assessments?
University admission overseas, study master's, develop program overseas.
Sorry, I'm having difficulty listening to the people in the back. So if you can repeat again, sorry.
Yeah, I say that whenever the purposes for taking the exam, for example, when someone wants to study abroad, and maybe wants to do a master's or develop program in an English-speaking country, so doesn't require the language.
Okay. Any other comments?
I took the teaching test. I used it for work. I used it to get bilingual.
Okay.
Also for personal matters, for example, in my case, I like assessment, I like testing, and I like to test myself. So I take in top like IELTS just for becoming familiar with the test and test myself for personal matters.
Okay. Good. Now, I want you to raise your hand if you have a positive perception of assessments. So raise your hand if you have a positive perception. Okay, now a lot of people raise your hand if you have a negative perception of assessment. Okay, can you share why you have a negative perception of assessment?
It's like some of the tests that I've taken are not like designed to evaluate how well we manage the language, rather how much can you understand. For example, there are some obvious questions that don't really give away how much you can manage in a conversation or in a real situation. So that's one, I guess.
Okay. Any other reasons why you have negative perceptions of assessment? Anybody else?
Sometimes it doesn't really measure what you really know or your competence, for instance, in English. So sometimes I get frustrated because I feel that the results are not enough to prove how much you know.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, anybody else have a comment?
Nope.
Okay. Now, if we move on to the next slide. So in the next slide, we're going to talk about how historically this has been used. And what we find is that assessment has been used for different visas, for different purposes. So here, I compile a list of different roles or desks displayed in society. And so the first one, to define membership. By this, I mean that society and in education, people have to status to determine whether someone belongs to a group or not. And the most common use will be, for example, for university entrance. So every in Colombia, whether it doesn't matter what university, you have to take some sort of test. So that the university can decide whether you become a student or not. So either take this once or ICAS, whatever you want to call it, or universities like Universidad Nacional don't have their own. So this is a way to do that. Another way is to classify people. So we use that to classify people as high performers, low performers, or good speakers, bad speakers. So we use tests to classify people. And unfortunately, some of those classifications sometimes are difficult to change. But once you're a low performer, you're always be a low performer. So that happens a lot, for example, in Colombia, ICAS or South Carolina. If you start low in the beginning, it's kind of difficult to overcome that. Just looking at how many times you expect. So another typical use is to develop curricula in textbooks. And this happens a lot in centralized or countries with centralized educational systems, where many tests, for example, in Colombia in 2005, when the Programa Nacional de Lingüismo started, one of the things that came with the Programa Nacional de Lingüismo was announced to the test-based test. And that time they show what level they were according to the Common European Framework of Reference. And along with that, a lot of textbooks came into Colombia. And a lot of textbooks, and they all say, oh, this is aligned with Common European Framework. So tests have always been used, and actually a lot of publishers are also developers. So there's always a relationship between tests and textbooks. Another role that assessment plays is that assessments are used to determine criteria for success and failure. Let's get this, an example is, what is the usual grade that people have to get in order to pass a course? Is it still 3? Yeah. Well, let me tell you that that's an arbitrary number. Someone decided 60% was the criteria to pass or to course. Some people take quizzes and they say instead of a 3 is a 3.2. Some people say a 3.5. But at the end of the day, it's a very arbitrary number. And very few people know what the difference is between a 3 and a 2.9, for example. And I'm not talking about, a decimal number. I'm talking about in terms of learning. If you score a 3 in a class and another person scores a 2.9, I think anybody knows what the difference is in terms of language learning. So it's a very arbitrary number, but tests are used to determine whether you fail or you succeed. Another important role is that tests are used for power and control. And this is very true, especially in classrooms. The teacher uses tests to control discipline, control attendance. So when teachers get mad, the students are talking, they usually threaten, if you're not quiet, I'm going to give you a test. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of people have negative perceptions of tests, because they associate tests with punishment. And unfortunately, this is one of the most common uses of tests. And a lot of centralized educational agencies to control schools, control teachers, control students. So we'll talk about this more. Like I said, there's no need for external control. In Colombia, a lot of departamentos de educación, Secretaría de Educación, use assessments for external control. They use tests to determine what teachers need to teach. what topics to cover. Can you still hear me? No?
Yeah, Alexis, we're good. We're good.
Okay, right. Usually, yes.
No, go on.
Okay. So that's also used for instruments in criminal policy. And we'll discuss this just in a few minutes. It's that official policies are accompanied by assessment. And finally, assessment also used influence teaching and learning. So just to recap, a lot of the uses that assessments have in education are for what people let's use a list of things or uses. So for example, tests are used for admission purposes. They are used for placement, for classification, to get that constant information, to assess attitude, to assess achievement, to assess whether you can be promoted. For example, you can go from the sixth to the 10th. But they are also to compare. So they compare you with other students. They compare you, a school with another school. Tests are also used to monitor progress. Some people even say tests used to improve quality of education. But the truth is that assessments, even though they play a role in improving the quality of education, they're not the solution. So to give you an example is if you're sick, if I use a thermometer to find out whether I have a fever or not, the thermometer will be like an assessment. It will give you information of your English proficiency, it will give you information about different language skills, but it doesn't help you learn that. It's simply a thermometer. Okay? So this is something that you have to really remember. And assessment is not to and some of the ways the board is using tests is simply by finding information about this. If you go to any website, if you go to the Teachable and it's for the script, so type getting about tests or even by the even if you go to the ICFES website, you'll find information about the exams. Information about what is the purpose of the test. What exactly is the test measuring? You know, is it measuring listening? Is it measuring speaking, reading, writing? You know, some of the skills, all of them. It also shows you, gives you information about how you're measuring the skills. They even give you sample items. You know that perhaps fitting into a lecture, answer a question, key that you probably have to look at a picture and what is the picture and so forth. They also give you information when you're going to be assessed. They also give you information about how long that exists. And you have different sections to give information about how long each section is. They also give you information about what decisions are made, tests is used, and what the consequences are. So the more information you get about the test, least likely people are thinking. And this is one of the problems that I found that go to the website, they don't give you a lot of information about the consequences of decisions. People in Colombia tend to abuse their ignorance and saber for different purposes. Some people even use it to determine whether to hire a teacher or to give them extended contract. They also use it to different purposes. It did not intend us to be used for those purposes. But because they don't tell people that what the purposes are, then people abuse that. Any questions so far?
Questions? No, not so far, Alexis.
Okay. Yeah. One of the things that I want to talk about right now is that if large assessment information on the test, talk about classroom assessment, this should also be the case. I did a lot of work with teachers when I was in Colombia, López. So I used to go to a lot of public schools, private schools, a lot of universities, to just talk to the teachers. And one of the things that I found was that a lot of the information about assessment, about tests, was kind of secret. The only one that had information about the test was the teacher. The students rarely knew, what kind of assessments they were going to be used. So it's very important as teachers that you provide information to the students about assessment. Tell them what the purpose of the assessment is. They have to know how you're going to assess them, when you're going to assess them, what kind of decisions are you going to make based on the test. Without this information, students are least likely or least likely to use the information from a test to improve their language learning process. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. Now, one of the things we have to understand is that tests are not in a vacuum. They're always associated with some people call external forces. And it's important for us to understand those forces. So that's what I want to talk about, the social and political context test. And in a few minutes, we'll talk about the social and political context in Colombia. Since this is the context that you in. So it's very important to understand some of those forces. So a lot of people argue that the purpose of any test is largely political. And I'll give you some examples in the next slide. Some people argue that there's a close relationship between testing and politics, in that there are often political reasons behind education. Like I said earlier, if you look at a lot of the language policies, educational policies in the world, you're going to see that they're all associated with assessment. And one of the reasons why people like to assessment in educational policy, ways to impose policies, is that when you compare assessment to the other alternatives, assessment is usually the less expensive. So let's take the example of Colombia. And, previously I talked about the Programa Nacional de Lingüística, or Colombia Bilingüe. There were two options. One was to spend a lot of money training teachers, providing the resources for teachers, especially in public schools. So instead of having, 40, 50 students in a class, hiring more teachers so there are less students per class, like better resources like audio material, video materials, textbooks. If you start adding all those things, those are very expensive. The other alternative is to simply put a test that doesn't have to teach. And in the case of Programa Nacional de Lingüística, people were required to take, if you were in high school, to take the Saber 11 English exam, and if you were in university, to take the Saber Pro English exam, and you have to demonstrate that you had at least better than a B1 level according to the Common Ukraine framework. And unfortunately, Colombia, that's the route that they took. Instead of spending more money in teacher education and teacher training programs, it was easier for them to simply design two new tests that they do every year. So people find that it's easier to use tests to impose policies rather than using, teacher training and providing better resources. So we're going to find that this is very common, not only in Colombia, but everywhere, that people prefer to impose language policies and educational policies as cheaper than, like I said, the alternative. Let me give you two examples around the world. The first one is an educational policy in the US.